Are you feeling like some dishes vanished into thin air right before your eyes? That's because we've said goodbye to a feast of holiday delights that once graced our tables. If you're curious about the treasures we've lost along the way, then stay tuned as we go through some holiday favorites that just disappeared. The roast Christmas goose was a cherished main player of all kinds of holiday season joy and feasting, especially around the northern and Midwest areas. The thing about this was that it became pretty much synonymous with warmth, good eating, and just a lot of tasty leftovers you could use the next day, too. This dish is now something you'd never see on holiday tables because it couldn't keep up with the shifting trends towards turkey. That protein was native to North America, and it was bigger than a goose and simply had more to offer per bird to any family. Plus, turkey farming had become sustainable and cheap, so prices for turkey were also pretty affordable. Geese, on the other hand, were seasonal and expensive. It wasn't something you could comfortably rely on to get, nor was it something that was easy to prepare either. You pile on a few years like that, and you can start to understand why geese just aren't the in thing anymore. So, where do we start when it comes to the wild boar's head? This thing once used to be the very definition of luxury, especially during medieval and Renaissance times, and in recent memory, even Christmas feasts. It went from enjoying a place like that in people's diets to largely just vanishing from the state of modern dining and the culture as a whole. There are a few reasons, of course, since nothing ever really happens without one. The thing with the wild boar's head was that there were some health concerns surrounding it. Apparently, the meat of the boar can carry a disease known as trichinosis. It made it a lot harder to consume the meat. But that wasn't the final nail in the coffin. Whether it was the cultural shift towards roast turkey or just how hard this was to prepare, somewhere along the way, America fell out of love with the idea of a wild boar's head. Roasted duck with orange bourbon molasses glaze was something that was always synonymous with haute cuisine and fine dining. It was an indulgent and luxurious meal, something you'd really get if you were trying to pull out all the stops. Maybe you were celebrating a win, a holiday, or maybe you just wanted to leave a good impression on your partner. Either way, whenever you wanted to swoop someone off their feet, this is what you would go for. That orange glaze has French roots, but when you put an American spin on it with bourbon and molasses, you get a very warm and southern sauce that has a lot of caramel notes mixed in, along with a very vivid sweetness. Sounds pretty lovely, right? So why'd it die? The thing is, this was popular around the same time one-pot meals were becoming a thing. People started to abandon dishes like that, which just took an extreme amount of work and a lot of complexity. You had to roast the duck, then you had to make the special glaze, and you had to do all of that just right or it wouldn't work. On the other hand, one-pot meals were time-efficient, better for a family, and a lot more simple to make. Lobster mornay actually refers to this French cheese sauce, which is considered mostly a variation of bechamel, which has become incredibly popular in America. It was considered one of the elites of the sauce scene back then, and it was actually named after a 16th century French diplomat. Apparently, Philippe de Mornay first found out how to make this when he added cheese to the ever-so-classic bechamel sauce, and as a result, we had lobster mornay. It's always been a big thing in coastal cities and places with a strong fishing industry here, especially since lobster being expensive was only relatively a new thing. Unfortunately, that's exactly where things went wrong for this dish. Lobsters are now a luxury item, thanks to industrialized fishing. They aren't the cheap and accessible catch of the day anymore that people are used to, and honestly, since they're a very irregular meal to have during the holidays, people are a lot more selective with what they do with their lobster now. All that combined with tastes going further away from what mornay sauce had to offer meant it couldn't last the long haul. You could say the same thing about smoked salmon pates, really. They were such regular catches during everyone's daily fishing routine that nobody was ever hankering for salmon or complaining about how the economy has made even that expensive, though that's exactly what would happen later on. Smoked salmon pate was this really savory and smoky dish, which was a perfect way to have a lot of savory-based fun during the holidays with salmon. But eventually, health-conscious eating put some dents in this dish's reputation. People started to leave dairy and cream-heavy dishes like this and instead went for low-fat, plant-based and dairy-free diets, which were fundamentally different from what you were going for with a smoked salmon pate. Then there's the matter of over-farming things, which is a bad habit Americans never really shake off entirely. Salmon was being fished almost too much, and laws needed to be put into place so that local salmon populations actually became safe again. Of course, over-farming also tends to lead to overexposure. It was seen as a luxury item back then, even though it was definitely easy to catch and buy. It was just prepared in luxurious ways, which gave it an air of royalty. But you spend a few years, or even a couple of decades, constantly eating salmon, and it loses that appeal. Nowadays, this dish is just a memory. Pear and pomegranate lamb tagine was a very aromatic and lovely dish right from the heart of Moroccan and North African kitchens and homes, and for a while, there was a lot of steam behind this. It was named after the earthenware pot it's cooked in, which is a tagine. It was one of the biggest examples of why slow cooking really was the way to go if what you were looking for was tender and flavorful meat. And despite the advent of actual slow cookers, people didn't really want to break away from tradition. Pomegranate and pears also had a place in Moroccan tradition, as the former was seen as a sign of peace, while the latter was often used in tagines wherever they were made. This was a popular item during weddings, Ramadan, or even Eid, and it was being made in Muslim communities. Unfortunately, it just takes so long to prepare. It's a lot more complicated than one realizes, and not everyone has clay pots lying around. If you replace that integral part of the dish, you just don't get the same flavor anymore. Chestnut stuffing is a pretty classic savory dish that was always traditionally associated with the holidays, perhaps even more so than everything else on this list so far. The star ingredients this time were roasted or boiled chestnuts, and they gave a pretty new spin on the otherwise very typical bread stuffings that would get passed around Christmas and Thanksgiving. Back then, stuffing recipes were also more of a cherished and higher class item. It was harder to make proper stuffings, so whenever someone did, it was always because some holiday or the other was happening. Plus, Americans had a bit of a soul-searching phase, but with food. They started to constantly see what else they could do with the formats they were familiar with. For example, we all love stuffing, right? So the thought process back then was, how could you make stuffing more varied? Think about it yourself. How different are the stuffings you make from the stuffings of yesterday, especially the 20th century? Or how hard is it to make these for you? Eventually, people started the road that led to us having such an easy time with these, and it meant abandoning labor-intensive things like chestnut stuffings in favor of easier, more modern, and global tastes that were popular around the world. Pecan-coated pork loin roast was a pretty festive dish that mostly was made out of pork loin that had been roasted and then further coated in this wonderful mix of crushed pecans. You threw in some breadcrumbs, seasonings, and then a little roasting to tie it all together, and you had yourself a certified hit of the 1980s and 1990s. These were featured as an entree and not a main course, actually, though I know it gives the opposite impression. It was definitely considered fine dining. The thing is, people really started focusing more on plant-based eating and vegetarianism in these past few years and decades. Fat was public enemy number one, and we can blame McDonald's well we want, but the seeds for this were sown a long time ago. You can't abuse cheese and bacon for so many decades and not ever expect to face some consequences. Plus, alternative ways to make pork were becoming more and more popular. This was just too complex, and pulled pork, pork chops, and pork belly were just more suitable and accessible ways to do it. Turkey sausage rolls were just a case of the better man, or in this case, the better sausage winning. See, people just gravitate more towards pork sausages as it was also the traditional choice for sausage rolls, and because it had a lot more flavor and savory notes than turkey ones did. I mean, people did eventually get a little tired of them, so they switched to turkey rolls, like that one little guilty pleasure you go to. Unfortunately, they just didn't have the oomph that pork sausages did. They were leaner, they were healthier, but they didn't have that flavor no matter what people did. And stealing sausage rolls from Americans might as well be a first-class felony. Whether it was before work, on your way to an interview, or just on the drive back home, these rolls were street food incarnate, and they were available everywhere. so people really got attached to that classic pork sausage roll taste. Plus, while the health benefits were there, they just weren't that overwhelmingly in favor of turkey sausage rolls. Also, a lot of the places where people got sausage rolls, turkey or pork, were frozen foods in grocery markets, which also tend to prioritize plant-based options a lot more than meat nowadays, thanks to the shift in trends. So next we have ham with red wine and cinnamon glaze, which was a big part of the entire trend of pairing up alcohol with different kinds of glazes in food. The combination of sweet and savory was something that got Americans every time, and the depth of red wine was something everyone was a sucker for. Plus, it always worked super well with the taste of cinnamon. The thing is, these weren't the glazes that would make the long haul. Those would be brown sugar and honey glazes, and others with similar flavor profiles. The entire trend of adding alcohol to your dishes was something that people left behind because of several reasons, but mostly it required too much precision and work. Not everyone had the skill for that, and if they did, then they didn't have the time for it, and if they even had that, then it was probably on their off days where they didn't have the energy for it. Plus, the tastes here were definitely accepted into the mainstream, but the mainstream has dozens of things that are more familiar and easier to digest. The acidity in red wine is something that doesn't always go well with ham if you don't know what you're doing, and unless you were a chef in a French restaurant, you probably didn't have the best idea. Not to mention all the health risks of consuming alcohol regularly with your food. Chicken ballotine with olive and fig tapenade was once a high-end holiday meal that you'd always go out for when you wanted a fancy winter dinner right around Christmas Eve. A ballotine itself is just boneless stuffed chicken that's been tied up and roasted well, but the real killer here is that tapenade. It adds a world of flavor and depth to the dish that otherwise just isn't there. The dish gives off luxury dining energy. I mean, it just sounds expensive too. Unfortunately, you can definitely be a top order on the menu of a 5-star restaurant that's always packed for the holidays and still just fall off. Stuffed chicken only sounds easy in theory. In actuality, it's a lot of work. You need to bone the chicken, then make the stuffing, and then you need to roll and tie it with a lot of attention to detail. Otherwise, it'll fall apart during the roasting. Have you ever heard of how people don't like to eat what they make because they're usually a bit tired after cooking? Imagine that, but times 10 here. There were simpler ways to make chicken that didn't take up most of your time and left you with only a little bit left to actually enjoy while you ate and relaxed. Potato, bacon, and leek gratin was a really odd one. It was the perfect thing to warm those cold winter nights into something peaceful and comforting, and it was also a wonderful dish to serve at holiday feasts, dinners, and tables. It took the layers of potatoes, often really thinly sliced ones, and then some crispy bacon and leeks. You'd bake these with a really creamy sauce and cheese, and then when they were that perfect golden color, you knew they were done. They had a pretty crispy surface-level texture, but the inside was really soft and gooey. The thing is, as nice and healthy as this dish sounds, it's actually way too loaded with calories and carbs. This isn't what the people wanted going forward, and even keeping this dish as an occasional weekend go-to or a holiday-only meal wasn't working out. Let's be very real here. Nobody keeps that diet in mind when it's holiday season. And that's exactly why meals that lure you into a food coma like this one are so dangerous. You end up with thousands of calories in surplus before you even realize it. Plus, potatoes also suffered some of the same problems with overuse that we had with salmon and mushrooms. Potatoes, next to corn, were the easiest crop you could farm and harvest, and they've been a sidekick to pretty much every mainstream American dish. Rice bowls, potato wedges, burgers, fries, steaks, mashed potatoes, you get the picture. Over time, people just got tired of the starchy flavor and wanted to leave it behind. Who knows? Maybe we could see a comeback. Do you think that's in the cards for all this lost 20th century cooking? So, with curried crab and watermelon salad, a pretty neat little tropical combo, there's never just one reason why this faded into obscurity the way it did. The crux of the issue this time was that it was an unfamiliar combination outside of the niche fan base it built up for itself. Sweet watermelon alongside pretty strong and spicy curry was just a divisive choice that didn't last long in the deck of most people. They had better and more synchronized options to go for, flavors that complement each other. Plus, there was also the health consciousness that's caused the downfall of so much on this list. People were going for more familiar watermelon recipes like salads instead of this. I mean, at first, its popularity was because it was the next new exotic thing that Americans could fantasize about. But when people went to actually try it, their illusions didn't really match up with reality. The expensiveness of the crab around the 2000s was also a pretty strong reason. Why hurt your wallet for something you aren't even sure about? Eventually, people just left dishes like these altogether and went to the tried and tested, stuff they knew worked and stuff they were familiar with. We're going to move on to ham balls with a brown sugar glaze, which was actually such a common meal in the Midwest and South thanks to how popular ham was becoming there. Canned meats like Spam didn't really help matters either, since processed ham basically took out the need to grind anything yourself, significantly cutting down the cooking time you needed here. The base was simple, just pork and ham, while the ingredients were pantry staples. In the end, it has a pretty unique profile. It's got salty ham, but it also has a sweet and tangy glaze. If you ever went over to Iowa or Nebraska, you'd get an authentic glaze that would rock your world. It takes a bit of trickiness to make and a lot of trial and error, since to really capture the essence of this dish, you need to strike the perfect balance between that sweet and tang, and most people just don't have the mind for that, especially when you consider how much Americans started favoring easy-to-make recipes that didn't take a lot of work and sweat. Eventually, ham balls fell victim to this wave of convenience-based cooking, and they simply became yet another forgotten relic in the many cookbooks that take up American shelves and libraries. Oyster fricasse refers to a cooking method pioneered yet again by our glorious neighbors, the French. Their knack for culinary exploration and experimentation leads us to beautiful little treats like this. Fricasse is a French term that refers to a method of cooking that's not exactly a sauté, but you don't stew it either. It's somewhere in the middle, and I don't think there really is a word in English for it. This dish always dealt with chicken, vegetables, and oysters that were simmered in this beautiful sauce. The reason they picked oysters as the headliner of this dish is because they're inherently really tender, and the briny flavor made the perfect sidekick to those tangy and creamy sauces. The thing is, oysters were exploited and abused. Overfarming became a really dangerous thing that was threatening the safety and existence of local oyster populations. And as a result, government intervention became necessary. Regulations around oyster farming were tightened up, and people lost interest in a wave of ever-changing trends and tastes. Turkey noodle poppy seed casserole. I'm going to give you a minute to digest that because it's definitely a mouthful to say, and remember, it's also exactly what it sounds like. Imagine a creamy base of turkey, egg noodles, lots of seasonings, and a poppy seed crunchy topping. This casserole was a Midwest and Southern classic that got really popular thanks to the harmony of flavors and the emphasis on turkey. Though, over time, people abandoned casseroles that were this heavy and rich because they were simply not trying to eat that much cream every other day. Then there was also the fact that this dish decided to include egg noodles in it. And in an era dominated by keto dieting forums and magazines, it just wasn't vibing with the public the same anymore. Convenient meals like instant pot cooking and meal preparation culture surrounding healthy eating took off in extreme ways, almost dominating kitchens across the entire nation. As a result, there just wasn't a lot of room left for something as complex and varied as this. It had a lot going on, and that's not always a good thing. Garlic mashed rutabagas and potatoes were one of the big ways in which Northern European culture ended up influencing American eating. Plus, it was also really popular in Scandinavian cuisines, and these were just a few of the ones that Americans began to draw inspiration from when they were expanding their own horizons past what they typically knew. What that ended up looking like was every Thanksgiving and Christmas meal being dominated by these, which might lead you to wonder what it's doing on a dish about recipes that have vanished into memory. Well, the thing is, mashed potatoes were simply better and simpler. You could add rutabagas to it and get really fancy if you wanted to impress your in-laws or something, but for the amount of work it had, the value just wasn't there. especially when you consider how easy it is to make mashed potatoes and the amount of things you can pair them with to elevate the taste. Garlic rosemary Brussels sprouts are kind of like smoked salmon pate, in that oversaturation is pretty much what kills an otherwise robust and healthy dish. This one was a favorite for grandmas too, because it was a great excuse to feed the grandkids some greens, and often it was also their only source of them. Brussels sprouts actually died down once before too in the 19th century, but they pulled off an impressive comeback in the 21st thanks to the idea of roasted vegetables suddenly being a nationwide trend. Plus, bitter greens were just the thing back then. Maybe because people had become so used to flavors like that thanks to the series of unfortunate events they had just been through. I mean, if you go through a global economic recession and 2 world wars, you're definitely coming out the other end with a changed palate. In times like those, vegetables were simply so commonly eaten that a lot of people got tired of them. Garlic, rosemary, and Brussels sprouts weren't really an exception. It became repetitive, stagnant, and boring, and people saw little to no value in eating it that way anymore. Festive lemon rice was a holiday side dish that was a big part of that entire Christmas cooking culture that I was just talking about. People used to make dishes like these in excess to really set the vibe and let people know that the holidays are very much here. It was always a fun time where people would experiment with dishes, and that's how America stumbled on this recipe in the first place. Unfortunately, that energy for exploration when it comes to food just vanished. People nowadays are a lot more inclined towards comfort food, like mac and cheese or casseroles, and a lot less open to new things they haven't tried before. The simple truth? It's become expensive to cook, and there's only so much time people can spare. Most are still working double shifts around the holidays, and in times like those, all you really want is a familiar plate of food that brings some energy back to you instead of things like festive lemon rice. While it was definitely a common holiday dish, especially in the South once, it lost to dishes that were more common, more flavorful, and a lot easier to make and eat. Hot mushroom spreads had arguably the most unfortunate case of all of them. It had all the things that you've been hearing about as reasons so far. And by that I mean, you know how we keep talking about dishes being left behind because they were too creamy, too loaded with carbs, a little too much? That wasn't ever the case with hot mushroom spreads. It was, however, heavy and packed chock full of cream cheese and butter. That was a turnoff for some, but not all of us. Lots of people simply decided to tone down the amount of cream cheese they put in there to make it healthier. But eventually, people started to shift more and more towards things like vegetable dips, bruschetta, hummus, and guacamole. This takeover signaled the end of the reign of hot mushroom spreads, which, despite being a pretty good side on its own, wasn't strong enough to keep up with the constant competition. Mushrooms also lost a lot of their mainstream pull with the American crowd thanks to all these other vegetables popping off. Also, people started to see mushrooms as a bit of an acquired taste, so in short, they just didn't have that mass appeal anymore. Then there was the fact that mushrooms in general were simply too overused in all other dishes. You had it in your pasta, you had it in your pizzas, you had it in your soups, and even your burgers. A lot of people felt like they just couldn't escape mushrooms wherever they went, and as a result, decided to ditch the idea entirely. Santa snacks were such a neat little tradition for children that I'm almost sad to see themes entirely wiped out from Christmas culture nowadays. Family customs change as much as food trends do, I guess, and these ones got replaced by a larger focus on just gift-giving. The entire cooking aspect of Christmas has largely gone down compared to previous times. Remember when people used to excitedly make eggnog and batches of cookies, roasts, casseroles, and so much more? It set you fully into that Christmas spirit and let you know that a relaxing winter was almost on its way. Plus, nowadays, there's just so much more to buy than there is to make. Why spend hours slaving away in the kitchen knowing you only get 1 or 2 offs per holiday when you can just buy concert tickets, cop a new PlayStation 5, or go crazy on a Black Friday sale and stock your gifts early? Exactly. Santa snacks never really had anything wrong or unpleasant about them as a food, but they did just fade away thanks to the culture around Christmas changing. let's put the main courses on hold for a bit and move on over to some captivating side dishes. Creamed pearl onions were a staple that fit that definition perfectly, especially around the halfway point of the 20th century. This side dish had these pearl onions that were wrapped up in a velvety sauce and were served with holiday roasts to really draw out that comfort food vibe. This had a lot going for it, really. It was conventionally pretty, so every thief liked making it because the presentation was killer and easy to do. There was a strong love for it in French American and British American communities, which pretty much took up large spots of American neighborhoods back in the day. It was a sign of luxury, so it was kind of associated with the upper class, and as a result, it was always something people were looking forward to making if they could. It was also really healthy, and it worked with American staples like mashed potatoes, green bean casseroles, and other recipes that you'd commonly associate with daily eating here or holiday season joy. The thing is, the taste here was mild. It was sweet, the texture was tender, but America's youth and middle-aged population was heading more and more towards umami flavors and strong, vibrant profiles. This dish just didn't have any of that, and as a result, it couldn't keep up with the ones that did. Grape jelly meatballs were this classic American appetizer that most commonly were made out of cocktail meatballs. The trick here was to really let them sit and stew in that sweet sauce that was made from grape jelly. Then you also had chili or barbecue sauces for that all-important savory aftertaste that Americans just cannot live without. This dish had its heyday around the 1960s and the 1970s, as it enjoyed a lot of time as a holiday staple. Christmas parties, community potlucks, and just cocktail parties were always laden with meatballs. It was pretty hard to find an event or neighborhood where different takes on meatballs weren't there, and grape jelly ones were some of the most common aspects of mid-century American cuisine. Unfortunately, this dish started to be considered a retro dish thanks to the rise of gourmet cuisines from other places. People started going for tapas, sushi, and charcuterie boards instead of America's best hits like meatballs, and there was just a bigger focus on homemade and locally sourced ingredients as far as the 2010s are considered. People wanted to break away from how much they had become used to processed food, and meatballs were usually something you'd find packaged or pre-made in stores. Also, the trends surrounding party food changed a lot. People went for smaller portions that had a lot of density flavor but were light on the stomach, which is pretty much the opposite direction of these balls. Chicken alouette was a pretty popular dish from the 1970s and 1980s. It had this chicken breast that would be smothered in a really decadent cream cheese filling that had been loaded with all kinds of herbs. Then you'd typically pair it with a savory sauce, and you had yourself a very comforting meal that brought a lot of warmth to people whenever they ate it. The thing is, it still was a lot of cream and cheese. That didn't fit with the trends that were ensnaring American cuisine and cooking. People had a mindset of out with the fat and in with the salads, especially since concerns around child obesity were rising more and more. People wanted to keep the protein aspect of dishes like this, but they wanted basically the same effect but in simpler chicken preparations. Soon they'd realize that they didn't actually appreciate chicken too much on its own. It was always with sauces, fillings, and stuffings, and when you took those out of the equation, Americans started to explore other sources of meat like fish and turkey. They were easy to make, and they had a lot more health benefits too. Turtle soup was something that became really popular in the South and the Gulf Coast, especially thanks to influences that persisted from the colonial era and the Depression. Back then, soups were so common that they were pretty much what middle-class families ate every day. The green sea turtle and the loggerhead turtle were some of the most common ones you could find on American coasts, and over time they became intertwined with the German communities and the Creole cuisine there and became incorporated into them. Louisiana, for example, always had a close tie between turtle soup and Creole or Cajun cooking. They'd often make a rich sherry with vegetables to go along with it, but this is where this story gets sad. The thing is, turtle populations are pretty threatened and endangered, and a big part of that is because poachers don't know the meaning of the word control. The trade for turtle meat was simply too profitable for people to care, and overhunting led to local populations fading away day by day. The Endangered Species Act eventually made it pretty hard to harvest turtles for meat, And then they also fell off of the radar of most Americans as they went towards things like cream of mushroom soup. Sole meunière is a delicate and refined French classic, consisting of tender fish fillets lightly dredged in flour, sautéed in butter, and spritzed with lemon. The dish gets its name, meunière, from the traditional French technique used in its preparation. It first captured hearts in France early in the 20th century, where it quickly became a fixture in upscale dining. Julia Child's profound endorsement of sole meunière, after experiencing it as her first memorable meal at La Couronne restaurant in 1948, catapulted the dish to international fame and sparked her lifelong passion for French cuisine. To whip up sole meunière, the fish fillets are sautéed until golden, then drizzled with a simple butter, lemon, and parsley sauce. Usually served with a side of veggies or potatoes, this dish offers a light, refreshing meal that perfectly showcases the subtle flavors of the fish. You have heard of popcorn, but I bet you have never heard of corn fritters. In fact, July 16th is National Corn Fritters Day in the US. This snack is one of the many that actually originated in America. It was created by the Native Americans in the mid-20th century. That is not a surprise since corn itself originated in America. The Native Americans turned these simple corn kernels into a golden, sweet, and crispy snack that they ate at home and at local fairs and festivals. In Indonesia, corn fritters are known as perkedel jagung or bakwan jagung. Apart from the obvious ingredients, oil, corn kernels, and flour, you also needed eggs and milk to achieve this meal. You can enjoy it with cream, honey, milk, or even jam. If you plan on trying this out on July 16th this year, note that it can be high in calories and fat, but also a good source of fiber. Steak Diane is an iconic dish featuring tender beefsteak smothered in a delectable cognac sauce, often flambéed right at your table for a touch of dining drama. Originating in mid-20th century America, this dish is named after the Roman goddess Diana. Its preparation includes pan-frying beef tenderloin and concocting a sauce from the pan juices, cognac, butter, mustard, and Worcestershire sauce. Adding a flambé enhances the rich flavors of the sauce dramatically. Steak Diane's allure was heightened by its theatrical preparation, often becoming the centerpiece of dining experiences in fine New York City restaurants such as the Drake and the Sherry Netherland, where celebrities frequently dined. Thought to have debuted in the 1950s in New York City, it quickly became a cornerstone of high-end dining. It was often served with mashed potatoes or vegetables, embodying the elegance of mid-century dining. Who remembers fried brains? Don't allow the name to throw you off. Fried brains was a delicious breakfast in the southern U.S. It was made from cow or pig brains, battered and fried until golden brown. Preparing this meal was easy, and it was delicious. Think of a snack, crispy on the outside and creamy on the inside, often eaten in a sandwich. It could be taken on its own, but pairing this crunchy meal with white toast was the best way to enjoy it. Fried brains became quite popular on menus in St. Louis, Missouri, after the rise of the city's stockyards in the late 1880s. This crunchy meal was eaten with relish by the people in the southern U.S. and some parts of Europe up until the end of the 20th century. The rural people also called it calf's brains, or brain fritters. Fried brains were mostly served fresh at diners and local fairs. Unfortunately, it lost its fame after it was rumored as a possible cause of the mad cow disease. Okay, that's a bit odd, but how about fried chicken livers? Eggplant parmesan is a hearty Italian-American favorite that layers crispy breaded eggplant slices with marinara sauce and cheese. This vegetarian delight originally hails from southern Italy, known there as melanzane alla parmigiana, and made its way to American shores with Italian immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The classic approach involves slicing the eggplant, breading it, and frying it until it's just the right shade of golden brown. These crispy slices are then layered with marinara sauce and a generous helping of mozzarella or parmesan, and baked until the cheese bubbles with joy. Eggplant parmesan became a staple in meatless meal traditions, particularly appreciated during the Lenten season among Catholic families in America. Gaining a firm foothold in American-Italian eateries during the 20th century, it often comes served with a side of pasta or bread, rounding out a truly satisfying meal. Have you ever wondered what passed as a threat during the Great Depression? Fried bologna did. This simple lunch was budget-friendly and provided a sense of warmth during those. It was also quite tasty. It took only 2 to 3 minutes to make, and all you needed was bologna and oil. While fried bologna could be found across the South, it must have originated from Arkansans. It later became popular in working-class households and a few diners after the Great Depression struck in the 1930s to 1960s, and people needed a cheap meal that could also serve as lunch and a snack. Fried bologna is mostly eaten with bread as a sandwich. Think of chunks of fried meat resting between soft, white bread. You might even pair it with lettuce, cheese, or fried eggs if you want a perfect experience. Stuffed pork chops are a comforting classic, stuffed to the brim with a savory blend and often served dripping in rich gravy. This dish found its place in the hearts of Americans in the mid-20th century, particularly loved in the Midwest and southern states. The preparation starts by cutting a pocket into pork chops, which are then filled with a stuffing made from breadcrumbs, onions, celery, and herbs. Once stuffed, the chops are browned until they sport a perfect golden crust, then baked to tender perfection. A favorite for family dinners and Sunday roasts, its hearty and filling nature made it a beloved meal. Stuffed pork chops are a testament to the versatility of pork, accommodating a variety of stuffings from apples to mushrooms, allowing everyone to tailor it to their taste. Did you know that in the 1960s and 1980s, fried cucumbers were a snack in some local bars? But first, these cucumbers were turned into pickles. Who came up with this? Burnell "Fat Man" Austin did. Fat Man owned a restaurant in Arkansas, the Duchess Drive-In near Atkins. Fat Man had a problem. There were many other restaurants in Arkansas, and he needed a signature dish to stand out. Well, right across the street from his drive-in was a pickle company, and so an idea was born. Fat Man coated the pickles in flour and fried them until they were crispy. He named them fried pickles and sold an order of 15 for only 15 cents. It became a hit, mainly because of its unique and tangy taste. In recent times, however, the Hollywood Cafe in Mississippi has claimed to have come up with this new snack. Shepherd's pie is a homely casserole crafted with ground meat and vegetables, crowned with a layer of mashed potatoes. Originally from the United Kingdom and dating back to the late 18th century, this dish traditionally uses lamb, as the name shepherd suggests, differentiating it from cottage pie, which uses beef. The typical preparation involves sautéing ground lamb with onions, carrots, and peas, then topping it with a creamy layer of mashed potatoes and baking it until it achieves a golden color. Shepherd's pie was a dining staple in both British and American homes throughout the 1970s, offering a robust and comforting meal. It gained particular favor during the colder months, providing a warming, comforting dish perfect for family dinners or gatherings where its layered textures and flavors were particularly appreciated. St. Louis-style pork ribs were incredibly attractive in Missouri, especially as a way for steakhouses to prove their skill. Maybe because this involved trimming the meat until only the best parts were left. Special dry rubs and sauces made for an extremely smoky taste that was the rib of every meat lover's eye back in the day. Coming back to the stew dinners that America loved, elk stew was a nutritious and heartwarming stew that was popular down in Montana for its savory notes. Elk stew can be made with anything provided you are not missing the elk itself. This flavorful stew, made with root vegetables like potatoes, chilies, and mushrooms, was a staple in many households. Chicken Kiev packs a punch with its chicken breasts stuffed with herbed butter, all wrapped up in a crispy breadcrumb coating. The dish stirs up a bit of a debate about its roots. Some folks reckon it was whipped up by French chefs back in the early 19th century, while others swear it was crafted by a Ukrainian chef in a Moscow kitchen in the early 20th century. Regardless of its backstory, Chicken Kiev began turning heads internationally around mid-20th century, becoming the go-to at dinner parties and special events. The traditional way to do it? Flatten those chicken breasts, tuck in a mix of butter, garlic, and herbs, roll them up, bread them, and fry to a golden brown. When sliced, the butter inside just bursts out, making a rich, flavorful sauce. By the 1960s, it had secured its spot on menus across America, often served with a side of veggies or rice. It's no surprise that the green chili stew was New Mexico's favorite dinner. Known as the green chili capital, this spicy stew filled with green chilies took the state by storm. The sudden boost in popularity could be justified by the fact that in the 1970s, the state of New Mexico actively promoted green chilies as a local delicacy to improve local sales of chilies. Not as spicy as the steak Diane served in New York. Sometimes flambéed and sometimes cooked, served with seasoned pan juices, the dish always came with Worcestershire sauce. Steaks were a common dinner option in the 70s, and locals were happy to see newer steak dishes like steak Diane being served. Duck à l'orange is a venerable French dish that pairs roasted duck breast with a vibrant, tangy orange sauce. Its rich history dates back to the 19th century, enjoying popularity among French aristocrats. The duck is typically roasted to achieve a crispy exterior, while the sauce is crafted from a reduction of orange juice, stock, and a hint of Grand Marnier or Cointreau. By the 1970s, this dish had become a hallmark of sophisticated dining, frequently chosen for elegant dinner parties or upscale restaurants. The delightful contrast between the rich, savory duck and the fresh, citrusy sauce creates an unforgettable flavor profile that showcases the dish's aristocratic French origins. The meticulous preparation and exquisite presentation make duck à l'orange a true culinary masterpiece. Pulled pork barbecue might have its origins in the South, but for any respectable barbecue done in North Carolina, it is a sure-fire option. Pulled pork barbecue usually consists of a slow-smoked pork that is served alongside crunchy cornbread and coleslaw with tangy sauces. Knoofle soup might have German or Norwegian roots, but the North Dakota version of it has always been a hit. Smoked meat, root vegetables, and dumplings with cream was a volatile mix of flavors that ticked most boxes. Kids are never fond of soups, no matter what, but this was a great way for families to work some nutrition in the diet through an enjoyable dinner. Chicken paprikash is simpler than it is enjoyable, consisting of just braised chicken pieces tossed in a sauce made from chicken stock and vegetables. Interestingly, Hungarian paprika was somewhat of a secret ingredient. Chicken paprikash used to give it a distinct flavor. Ohio would popularize the dish in the 60s, but it would not be until the late 70s that it really took off across restaurant chains. Veal Parmigiana brings a little taste of Italian-American heritage to the table, featuring breaded veal cutlets smothered in tomato sauce and melted cheese. Born in the kitchens of Italian immigrant communities in the U.S., this dish was a clever adaptation of traditional Italian recipes, tailored to American tastes. It first surfaced in the early 20th century, with Italian-American families swapping out eggplant for veal. Introduced in Italian-American eateries soon after, veal Parmigiana became a staple. The preparation? Bread those veal cutlets, fry them up, layer with marinara sauce, and a good helping of mozzarella or parmesan, then bake it until it's bubbling and golden. It hit its peak popularity in the 1950s and 1960s, often accompanied by pasta, crafting a hearty and satisfying meal. Unique steaks made a comeback with chicken fried steaks in Oklahoma, which became popular because they deviated from traditional steak recipes. Chicken fried steak was just breaded chicken fillets that were fried then served with potatoes, but they hit every sweet spot in your body. People could not afford fancy beef and chicken was cheap, so this new form of steak was welcomed with open arms onto dinner tables. Salmon was also welcomed with open arms, as cedar-planked salmon was a local delicacy in Oregon. Locals from Oregon submerged cedar planks for around 2 to 3 hours in water and then cooked salmon on it, giving the dish an intense flavor. That, paired with lemon juice and garlic, would captivate the taste buds of Oregon throughout the 70s. Pot roasts and Pennsylvania are a match made in Heaven's Kitchen. Slow-roasted pork stewed and cooked in a pot roast with vegetables added this perfectly caramelized flavor. Tougher cuts of meat would be used, but you knew you had it right when the meat was just falling off the bone. Rhode Island has always loved its seafood, and stuffed quahogs were a popular dinner in the 70s. Quahog clams that would be filled with bread, chorizo, and then more clams. Rhode Islanders affectionately refer to them as chowder clams. The dish itself was a little on the pricier side, so it was not the most popular dinner, but it was definitely sought after. There's no way this list will be complete without Spam. It was one of those few meals used by the US military to survive the Second World War. Spam is basically canned pork and ham. The soldiers needed all the protein they could get, and what better way than with this canned meat? In 1937, Hormel Foods combined pork, water, salt, sugar, and sodium nitrate and sold it off as food. However, this wartime necessity soon became a new twist on dinner tables back home. Fried Spam was made with Spam, flour or batter, and oil. It became popular during the Second World War due to its long shelf life, and its popularity lasted till the 1970s. Apart from the soldiers in war, middle and working-class civilians also ate this treat at homes and in diners. They loved it because of its long shelf life and because it was a versatile and easy-to-prepare protein source. Most veterans would remember this meal from their time in the war, just like I remember this next fried food, the fried tripe. Apple cider pork chops that were glazed with the sauce took over New Hampshire in 1975, but the seeds had been sown a while ago. Together with some minced garlic, this applesauce pork chop combo took New Hampshire by storm. Famous, tasty, and not ready to give up its spot, apple cider pork chops would stay throughout the 70s as a staple dinner food. Now, one thing this list was missing was pasta. New Jersey fixes that by eating stuffed shells for dinner. This meal would be a classic of New Jersey shores and Italian-American restaurants. Ricotta cheese and a marinara sauce filling inside pasta shells that are then baked was a very new and trendy food back in its time. In the 1960s and 1970s, Italian-American communities fried their zucchini. This meal later faded off in the 1980s after serving families for over 30 years. The sliced zucchini was coated in seasoned flour or breadcrumbs and fried until crispy. Preferences vary, though. Some do not like the deep brown version and would scoop it off the oil while it's still white. Others would cut their zucchini in stripes, while some would make round shapes. Until it faded off, fried zucchini was a favorite appetizer at Italian family dinners and was even passed down in family cookbooks. We all love to sneak off crumbs of dough while baking, but have you ever tried frying some? Citizens of the US did in the 20th century, but they were not the only ones. This snack can be traced to as early as 8000 BC in China and Egypt. Fried dough was crispy and golden on its exterior and fluffy and white inside. It made a loud crunch when you bit into it and left your tongue with a sweet aftertaste. To prepare this, the dough was shaped into rounds or strips and fried until golden, then dusted with sugar. It was served at fairs or carnivals across the US and was loved by all classes of people, including little kids. It was also known by various names like elephant ears or beaver tails. Veal marsala is an elegant Italian dish that features tender veal cutlets simmered in a rich marsala wine sauce. Originating in Sicily, where marsala wine has been a staple since the 18th century, this dish made a splash in Italian-American kitchens in the mid-20th century. The classic method involves lightly flouring the veal cutlets, then pan-frying them in butter until they're beautifully browned. The magic happens when the pan is deglazed with marsala wine, adding mushrooms and sometimes cream to create a sauce that's both sweet and savory. As Italian restaurants in America evolved to showcase regional specialties, veal marsala emerged as a sophisticated favorite, commonly served with pasta or potatoes to enhance the tender veal with its robust marsala sauce. Salmon kolibiak is a dish of luxury, with salmon fillet wrapped in puff pastry, along with rice and mushrooms, originating from Russia, where it's known as kulebyaka. The name stems from the Russian word for a type of rich, filled pie. The traditional setup lays a seasoned salmon fillet on a bed of cooked rice and mushrooms, then envelops it in puff pastry, which bakes to a golden flakiness. This dish became popular in the banquet menus of European royalty and was featured in several Russian novels. Celebrated in France during the 19th century and beloved for special occasions, salmon kolibiak is often served with vegetables or a light salad. The blend of ingredients inside the pastry creates a sophisticated, hearty meal that showcases the culinary crossover between Russian robustness and French finesse. Chicken divan is all about comfort, featuring chicken and broccoli smothered in a creamy cheese sauce, baked to perfection. It originated in the early 20th century at the Divan Parisien restaurant in New York City, named for the very place that concocted it. Initially designed as a showcase of the chef's skills in French cooking, chicken divan made its mark in the mid-20th century as a dish that blended sophistication with simplicity. To make it, layer cooked chicken and broccoli in a baking dish, pour over a sauce made from butter, flour, cream, and cheese, and bake until it's golden and bubbly. This dish is a testament to the fusion of French culinary art with the comfort of American home cooking, creating a truly delightful dish. Fried oysters were once a coastal and southern delight in the 19th and 20th centuries. Oyster beds were abundant in the South, so it makes sense that the locals made a meal out of them. Once the shells came off, it was a party. At first, fried oysters became popular because they came at no cost at all. This snack was found in low-income homes until the 20th century. All you needed was some oysters, cornmeal, and most importantly, oil. Just like the fried frog legs, it was mostly served fresh in paper trays in seafood shacks and coastal fairs, and it was eaten with hot sauces and even in soups and salads. Seafood lovers loved it because it was a good source of protein and omega-3 fatty acids. Some locals also called it oyster fritters or cracker crumb oysters. Crab Louis, also known as the king of salads, is a classic that originated on the U.S. West Coast in the early 20th century. While its birthplace is up for debate, some say the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, others point to Solari's restaurant in Seattle. It always features Dungeness crab, hard-boiled eggs, asparagus, tomatoes, and a creamy dressing made from mayonnaise, chili sauce, and spices. Crab Louis was dubbed the king of salads by the San Francisco Chronicle in 1914. A nod to its deluxe ingredients and popularity among the elite. It first gained traction in the 1920s and 1930s, becoming a favored dish for lighter dinners or luncheons. The mix of crisp lettuce, savory crab, and tangy dressing, served up in an elegant presentation, made it a must-have at many a high-end restaurant and social gathering. First, what kind of name was Hush Puppies? The name means exactly what it sounds like. Hush Puppy. It is said that back in the mid-20th century, people on fishing trips would be grilling their catch when their hounds would begin barking hungrily. To quiet them, their owners would throw bits of dry dough in the fryer and throw the fried pieces to the dogs to keep them quiet. There is another version that includes soldiers trying to quiet their dogs during a war, but many food blogs have written off that version as a myth. Hush Puppies, initially created to hush puppies, became an excellent side meal often served with fish. Hush Puppies was simply cornmeal batter fried into small golden balls. It became popular in seafood restaurants in the southern U.S. after the American Civil War, since cornbread was cheap and could be made in many different shapes. Fried catfish was a no-brainer for Arkansas because the state is quite literally flooded with catfish. Readily available fish and locals who love fried food led to the creation of fried catfish. A rather interesting way to cook catfish, fried catfish reached the peak of its popularity in the 70s, becoming common at most family dinner tables. Talking about fried food, chicken cacciatore in California is chicken fried in olive oil and then simmered in a sauce of white wine, tomatoes, and herbs. Italian-American restaurants in the state absolutely love having this as either a main course accompanied with garlic bread. The balanced meal of bread, chicken, and tomato soup made for a perfect dinner spread. Coquille Saint-Jacques is a dish that exudes elegance, featuring scallops baked in a creamy sauce and often served right in their shells. This dish's charming name, which translates to St. James's shells, nods to St. James, the patron saint of pilgrims, and references the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. To prepare it, scallops are gently sautéed in butter, then bathed in a sauce crafted from white wine, cream, and shallots. The final touch is a sprinkle of breadcrumbs before baking until the top turns a tempting golden brown. This dish offers a delightful exploration of scallops' delicate and sweet flavors, beautifully enhanced by the creamy sauce. Coquille Saint-Jacques has long been a fixture at festive dinners where its refined and sophisticated character is a favorite. Beef stroganoff is just as good as it sounds, and it was enough of a hit in Nebraska for almost every steakhouse to start serving it. Creamy sauces topped on egg noodles with sliced, perfectly tender beef resulted in a flavor that the state of Nebraska just could not refuse. Beef stroganoff was most popular in the 70s, and for good reason, even if it is harder to find now. Prime ribs are an annual tradition down in Nevada. Smoked and glazed ribs served with an assortment of sides like potatoes, this dish was a dinner table special. Many steakhouses across Nevada feature prime ribs on the menu as a special, and they were especially popular in the 70s because chefs had started to add their own variations to the dish. Moussaka is a rich, layered Greek casserole that marries slices of eggplant with ground meat and a creamy bechamel sauce. This dish has Middle Eastern origins but was perfected in its modern form by Greek chef Nikolaos Tselementes in the early 20th century. Preparing moussaka involves frying slices of eggplant, layering them with a spicy meat mixture traditionally made with lamb or beef, and then smothering it all under a luscious bechamel sauce. Once assembled, it's baked until the top turns a tempting golden brown, offering a deep, flavorful feast. Moussaka made a name for itself in Greek cuisine and entered American dining scenes in the mid-20th century, often served with a side salad or bread for a balanced, fulfilling dinner. If you love fried chicken, you might want to come a bit closer to this. Back in the 1940s to 1970s, the people in the southern part of the U.S. loved fried chicken so much that they also ate the livers. Not only did they eat them, they fried them too. The livers were coated in seasoned flour or batter and fried till crispy. Imagine enjoying a hot, crunchy snack with a bottle of beer or whiskey after a tasking day. Even though chicken livers were loved for their amazing taste, it was often served as an appetizer with a rich sauce. Working-class families loved how easy it was to make this snack. It was also a rich source of iron and vitamin A, but also had high cholesterol content. Lamb Navarin is a traditional French stew that sings of spring, packed with tender lamb and fresh spring vegetables. Originating from Normandy, this dish is best when the ingredients are at their peak freshness, typically prepared in the spring. The name Navarin itself is inspired by the French word for turnip, navette, a staple in this hearty stew. The process starts by browning the lamb to perfection, then slow cooking it with turnips, carrots, onions, and potatoes in a flavorful broth until everything is tender and infused with flavor. Lamb Navarin is a dish that really captures the essence of spring, highlighting both the succulence of the lamb and the sweetness of the fresh vegetables. It's commonly served with crusty bread or a side of rice, making it a fulfilling and comforting meal. Do you love a snack that is crispy on the outside but juicy on the inside? If you had lived around the 1960s and 70s, you would have loved fried mushrooms. Fried mushrooms were made by deep-frying edible mushrooms. It was a common appetizer in the U.S. and was a middle-class favorite mainly because it was promoted in restaurants or fish and chips shops as a healthy alternative to other fried foods. It was enjoyed with ranch dressing, garlic mayonnaise, or barbecue sauce, and sometimes spices were added to the batter for flavor. Along with other chicken parts, the gizzard was also sought after in the mid-20th century by Southerners in the U.S. Gizzards formed a huge part of the fried chicken gizzard meal that was often served fresh in restaurants or at home. Fried gizzards were mostly crispy. The crispy part was important as this meal was known and loved for being so chewy. It was often served as an appetizer or snack during family traditions. Some people prefer their fried gizzards to be more tender, and this is achieved by first stewing the gizzard for a long time before being deep frying. Turkey tetrazzini is a creamy, comforting pasta dish that features turkey, mushrooms, and parmesan, all baked to a golden finish. It was crafted by chef Ernest Arbogast at the Palace Hotel as a tribute to Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini, believed to have been first made in San Francisco in the early 20th century. This dish begins by sautéing turkey and mushrooms, then melding them with a lush sauce made from butter, flour, milk, and chicken broth. The creamy mixture is then tossed with cooked spaghetti, sprinkled with Parmesan cheese, and baked until it's bubbly and golden. Turkey tetrazzini has become a classic American comfort food, especially popular for using up leftover turkey, making it a post-Thanksgiving favorite. Salmon bakes in Alaska go much further back than you would imagine. Introduced in the 1800s, commercial restaurants only started to serve salmon bakes during the 1970s. Chinook salmon was one of the most widely caught fish in Alaska, and so locals created multiple dishes using it. Chimichangas are a deep-fried burrito with lots of peppers to add a pretty heavy kick depending on the sauce. Available easily in most states nowadays, chimichanga actually had their roots in Arizona. Macayo's Mexican Kitchen claims they put chimichangas on their menus first in the 1970s. Since then, the dish has ruled over Arizona as a good dinner food that can be served and enjoyed. Tater tot hot dish involves some of America's iconic foods. If you wanted a casserole for dinner, then this ground beef and tater tots casserole was the go-to food. Including tater tots initially raised some eyebrows, but eventually, locals in Minnesota fell in love with the dish. Fusion food like tater tot hot dish was definitely a trend in the 70s. Shrimp and grits used to be something that fishermen ate with their families on a low budget, but since then it has undergone significant development. The 1970s saw shrimp and grits turn from a breakfast food to a dinner must-have. Typically, it would be creamy shrimp served under grits, but lots of restaurants would add cheese, sausages, or bacon as well to make the dish more filling. Do you love apple pie? But what about a fried one? If you are an adventurous eater, you should try this. It might not look very appealing in comparison with a normal apple pie, but it would look somewhat like an empanada. It is quite delicious. Apple pies don't have a clear origin story, but they are traditional Southern desserts that brought families together during the apple harvest season in the mid-20th century. Historically, in the American South, all fried pies were known as crab lanterns, a term that dates back to at least 1770 and originated from crab apple pies that had slits for ventilation, slits that resembled a lantern. All you needed to create this old meal was dough, apple filling, oil, and sugar for dusting. It was enjoyed at family gatherings or sold at local fairs and diners with glazes and dipping sauce. With that, we wrap up our list of 25 holiday dinners that have vanished from our tables now. Comment down foods you think should be brought back. Don't forget to like and subscribe.